Welcome to the Todd DeVoe Show, exploring the best ideas and lessons for leaders.
Good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you are at in this fine land. And I'm excited today to have this conversation about leadership, what it means to lead men and I guess women too, in the sense of in the military, and then how do you transition from that into leading into the real world, as we call it. Fran, welcome to the show.
Hey, Todd, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. So
in the real world.
Yeah, I always think about like the real world compared to like the military world, right? Like I know like leadership is. I mean, I joke. And were you always an officer, or were you enlisted first?
I was. I went after I graduated Boston University. I went into officer candidate school, and I was an officer from the start. Minus the couple of weeks you spend at basic training, where you're technically an E4 specialist.
Oh, okay.
And then they discharge you, and then they commission you. So, but if you ever tell anybody I was enlisted for a short period of time, they'll throw you out of the room. So you don't get to say that.
The reason why I asked that question is because like I remember you get like this, an 01 or 02, walks into the room and says, "All right, boys, this is what we're doing," and like lays down the law, what's going to be happening, and we're all like, "Yes, sir, yes, sir, yes, sir." And then he walks out from briefing, and then we take a look at the senior NCO in the room and go, "Is that really how we're doing it?" To see like if that's like the real way things are done. And the reason why I say the real world compared to the military is because we're going to listen to you, because we have to, right? I mean, we're, that's just the rules. But, when you're leading in organizations that are, civilian-based organizations that aren't paramilitary, like fire or law enforcement, you really have to lead from a different space. Do you agree with that?
Absolutely. I mean, I think the military does a really great job of teaching you what I call perspective. I mean, you are afforded the opportunity to lead in a variety of different environments, right? And so you're always faced with these different challenges, and you're in different areas of the world, and you have a different challenge to solve, but you also have really different people. And I think one of the great things about the Army is that it really takes the entire population, and it's a good subset of what our demographically we look like. And so you go into the Army, and all of a sudden you're with people who are not from where you're from. And there's kind of like this general representation in percentages. And say I'm from Boston and New England. And I got there was like one other guy, two other guys from Boston and New England. But then there's a lot of people from the South. There's a lot of people from the Midwest. And all of a sudden here you are in a variety of different experiences, a variety of different challenges that you have to face with people who don't always think like you. And even though you're all American, you're there for the same reason. And I went in 2003. So it was still very much, the post 9/11, we got to get after it. We were in Iraq. And now you have to figure out, how am I going to lead these people? How am I going to work with these people? Forget about leading them, in a way that is going to get them to all come together. Those lessons about building teams, building organizations, listening, understanding people, they translate well after the military into anything that we set off and do.
So I agree with you. And I do think it's a great place for young men and women to cut their teeth in leadership. Because even as a enlisted guy, right? I went through being, an E nothing up to the point to where I had a group of guys. In this case, I didn't have any women in my group. A group of men that I had to lead, right? As a petty officer. And you go through training, right? I mean, the one thing the military does do well is they train the crap out of you. They're going to make sure that like what you're doing. They're not afraid of putting you in classes. That's for sure.
Yeah, they train you and assess you. That's You're always training, and you're always being assessed.
So your journey is kind of interesting though, because you went special forces, right?
I did. So I went into the Army, and I spent about 3 years in the infantry, deployed to Iraq for a year during that time with 4th Infantry Division. And then from there, my window opened up to go to Special Forces. And then I went to selection, was selected, went to the Special Forces qualification course. And then I spent the next 9 years as a Green Beret.
Wow. That's a pretty lengthy process to become a Green Beret though, isn't it?
It was, I think, about all in all, almost 2 years. So you go to you apply, you have to be selected to go to selection. Then you go to selection. It's a 3-week process. If you make it, and there's a number of majority of folks don't, and even people who make it all the way through the course may not be selected. Then they'll go from there to the Special Forces qualification course, which can be, at a bare minimum, it's a year. If you're a medic, it could be up to 2 years because you have the additional medical training. And then if you recycle or don't pass any of the phases and you're afforded the training opportunity to do it again, that's what we'll call it, then that's going to expand your time there.
I always think it's amazing that people don't understand that when you go through the selection process, and you could pass everything, and then you still don't get your tab because they're not like, they're like, thanks for coming out. You didn't quite just make the cut, even though you passed everything. So it's not like you don't meet minimum qualifications, right? There's not the minimum qualifications that you have to meet. You have to actually maximize those minimum, the basic, right?
Well, they're evaluating you on what they call the whole man or whole soldier. And now, right, now it used to be whole man. Now we've introduced women into the force, which has been a great change and a great positive addition to the regiment and to the organization. But it's the whole concept. And so you could be phenomenal at 1, 2, 3 things, and you could be really bad at 1 or 2 things and still make it, right? Because they're evaluating you for the job that they're asking you to do, which might be different if you're an officer or if you're enlisted. They're evaluating you on a set of characteristics, which when placed in certain scenarios will be weighted differently. But no one is perfect in absolutely everything that they do, but there is a minimum standard for everything. And at the end of the day, what it comes down to is character and your ability to have a high degree of integrity and your ability to get along and work well with others. And so you could have people who make it all the way through who were phenomenal. They're physical specimens. They lead pretty well. They solve complex problems, but they're a jerk and nobody likes them. And they do an evaluation at the end, and you do a peer review, and everybody says, "No, I can't stand this person. I don't want to be around him. I don't trust him. I wouldn't put him on their team." And you're not going to make it.
Right. I was looking at this this video that Simon Sinek has out, and he was dealing with Navy SEALs, and they go through this graph that he puts on. I don't know if you guys have not seen it, you should check it out. It's pretty interesting. I'm probably going to butcher it up a little bit here, but you'll get the understanding of the picture here. Is that on one end is your ability to do the job, right? On the one axis, and the other axis, the y-axis, is your, for lack of a better term, I'm going to say likability standards, or your ability to work with others. And across the board, they're saying like the Navy SEALs would prefer to have somebody who is higher up on the y-axis than the x, and even it may be even mediocre when it comes to your skills, because skills you can always improve, but your personality and working with others, it's really hard to change that person. You guys have the same feeling with? Is that about right?
It is. So we have what's called in special operations, and I talk about it on my podcast, on the Jed Burke podcast. One of our grounding foundations of the podcast is the 9 characteristics of performance that, as defined by Special Operations Command. And so Special Operations Command has these 9 characteristics, and these 9 characteristics form the foundation by which really everything else is built on it, right? And depending on the situation that you're in, it's going to call for you to exhibit some combination of a number of these, whether it's humility or curiosity or drive, integrity, team ability. You may take some of those at one point and not be using others, like emotional strength or effective intelligence might not come into play. Now, each service component in special operations, whether Green Beret, Navy SEAL, Army Rangers, Air Force, the Marines, they all weight these 9 differently. So to be a Green Beret, there's 4 or 5 of them that we weight heavier than the Navy SEALs do. team ability, and this is a conversation I had, I think it was in episode 41 on my podcast with Rich Davini. And Rich Davini is a Navy SEAL, he's a retired Navy SEAL, and he wrote a book called The Attributes. And it came out last year, and The Attributes takes these 25 attributes that then define your character. And he ran selection and assessment for SEAL Team 6. So, I mean, phenomenal counterterrorism organization, best in the world at what they do and best in the world at team ability. And him and I had this conversation about team ability because as a Navy SEAL, you're absolutely right. Team ability is weighted heavier because almost, I won't say 100% of the time, but the majority of the time, Navy SEALs are not asked to do anything on their own. It's a collective environment. Everything they do is as a team. So you may not be as proficient because you're right. They can teach those skills, but you have to be able to work with others. As a Green Beret, our mission of unconventional warfare, of foreign internal defense, actually dictates that when we operate as a 12-man team, that's actually rare. Most of the time, our 12-man team will deploy, and then it will segment down into 6, into 3, into 2, and often into 1. And you may find yourself being the only person or one of 2 in some nation in Africa. I found myself, in some nation in Central Africa, me and one other person,
Right.
briefing an ambassador, going with a foreign indigenous force out to a training facility in the middle of the jungle. And that's it. And so your team ability becomes less because we're weighting now, integrity, curiosity, humility higher because we're asking this person to go out on their own. And now we have to put the full trust in that this person is going to execute what they've been asked to do and do it to a high degree without oversight.
Right. And you can see the difference too in the language, right? When we talk about the Navy SEALs, they refer to the teams, right?
Mhm.
All the time we refer to the teams. And so it's part of their vernacular and their culture. I always find it interesting too with the Green Beret specifically that there are times when you guys are a one-man shop. And when I was in the field a few times, we got to bump into a few of you guys, and it was always interesting to see, like, I was like, where the hell did this guy come from? He just like pops out of nowhere, and it's like, okay, and then he disappears into the mist. You're like, okay, there he goes, wherever he went, right? So it was like a unicorn running around into the areas. So let's kind of transition from the military where we are, right? And then we go into bringing those skills to the civilian population, and even like I would say even like talk about in government side, but not necessarily the paramilitary, right? Like, so if you're working, say, in a for the city of X, and you're running, like emergency services, or you're running public works, how do you apply those leadership principles to, say, to government agencies or to civilian businesses?
Yeah, I mean, the principles are the same. What's leadership at the end of the day? There's a lot of different definitions of leadership. I give a series of keynote talks where we start with some definitions of leadership. And one of the ones that I like when we talk about leadership in this context is that leadership is the ability to inspire others to do something that they may not have otherwise done. And when we talk about government, when we talk about the public sector, we talk about emergency services, there's a lot of transitionability from the military into those organizations because safety, protection, security, emergency response, disaster recovery, there's a lot of synonymous features in there. So it's an easy parallel. And at the end of the day, you're asking people to show extreme amounts of emotional strength in times of uncertainty, in times when the majority of people will fail to make decisions. And if they make decisions, will often make poor decisions because they haven't had what we call effective intelligence. They haven't had a series of experiences in their past that then can guide and shape them. Then when we take people in these public sector domains, especially in emergency services, there is something gained from being on earth longer. They've just had experiences. They've just been there. They've seen that. So they know I can control now my emotions. I've generally seen a situation like this. Maybe it's not the same, but I know how I can effectively think through my response. In the private sector, when I ran security programs, we always would talk about standard operating procedures for emergency response, and we would say, well, get out the playbook, and somebody pull out this, 4-inch binder, and it would have all these pages on, what to do. And I'd immediately say, you got to throw that thing out the window. Nobody's going to read that.
Right.
We need to teach leaders how to think. We can't teach leaders what to do. If you teach leaders what to do, then you're destined for failure, because there's no innovative thinking. There's no creativity. There's no ability to adapt a plan to a certain situation. What we have to do is create frameworks. And I'm big now. I'm the chief people officer of a company called Analytics out of Boston. We have 700 employees, and we're growing. We're working our vision is to double the size of the company in the next 3 years. And everything I talk about is framework. Show me the framework, build the framework. We're talking about I had a call this morning about training, and we're saying, well, what are the we have 7 or 8 different departments, and they said, well, we need to build the training content for each one of these departments. And I said, no, we don't. Eventually we do. But first we have to get the leaders of these departments down. We have to give them a framework to think through their training priorities. Who are you trying to train? What is the baseline level of training that you want to implement that's common to all? What are the additional skills based on your job that are specialties? What are the requirements that you have from compliance? Get those listed. Then big picture what has to be trained. Who you need to train, and then you can start building a curriculum that's teaching them how to think through all of this training plan. If we just sit there and say train these 10 courses, you're never going to get there.
Right. Where do you see, and it's kind of a weird bifurcated question, because I don't think all managers are leaders, right? I really truly believe that. But where do you see leadership failures in corporations? Is it at the management level? Is it at the CEO level? Like when it has the biggest impact on the organization?
Well, I ask a lot of bifurcated questions, so I feel you. I say that leaders exist at every level of an organization. There's no level at which you come in and it's like, okay, well, now you're a leader, so be prepared to lead today. You could be a leader and be the only person in your department, the only person on your initiative, but your ability to come to work, drive change with your initiative in your world, gain consensus, work cross-functionally across other departments, build something from nothing. You're a leader in doing that, and you may not traditionally be able to walk in the office and be like, these are my men, and point to everybody. It could be you. But if you're the CEO and you're a large organization, you do have that. So now it starts to become it's more visible, right? The decisions that you make become more visible. The way you act, the mentality that you have, the way you present yourself become more visible. Management is task related. Management is, do you show up on time? Do you park in the right spot? Do you act appropriately? Do you complete the tasks that have been assigned to you? Those are management tasks. Those are management skills. Are you good at managing? I say managing for a reason, right? Coordinating a bunch of things at one time across different people with different projects. That's management. Leadership is the ability to get those people and yourself to actually execute those tasks and execute those tasks at a high level without you having to stand over their shoulder and tell them what to do, how to do it. So our ability to lead you have to be able to manage, to lead. Like, you can't say like, oh, well, I'm a leader, I'm not a manager. Well, I mean, look, if you're going to be at a certain level, you've got to be able to manage people, because if you can't get people to show up on time and come to work and execute tasks, right? It doesn't matter how inspiring you are. If they don't respect your ability to actually manage them, it's never going to work. So they're linked together very closely, but there is a hard difference between the two. And where it falls apart is when people in leadership positions don't act like a leader. And what do I mean by
Right.
act like a leader? I mean, they act like a manager. They tell everybody what to do. Maybe they're good at it, but then they don't actually do what they're telling others to do. And so there's not setting the example. A leader's job is to set the example. It's to inspire others to do more, to achieve what they're asking them to achieve. But you can't ask someone to do something if you're not willing to do it yourself.
A couple things. Drucker and Singer and Weber talk about the idea of managing tasks and functions, right? Like, if you take a look at those are like the godfathers, if you will, of management, of systems management, business management. And so they talk about managing functions, things that you're doing, whether it's at the factory, but they don't really talk about, like, they don't manage people. And I think the difference is that you manage things and you lead people, and you right, to be proficient, you kind of have to do both. And then now the other side of that is, I was listening to Freakonomics podcast. And they were talking.
Podcast.
It's a great podcast. If you guys don't listen to it, it's probably one that you should put on there on your list. And he was going in the talking about the Peter Principle, which was actually was a sarcastic book that was written back in the 70s about management. That's where you get the idea of you rise up to your incompetence, right? But what they mean by that is, if you really take a deeper look into it, it's not that you're incompetent, that you rise. Like, if you're an incompetent person, you get promoted. It's that they promote you until you can't do the job anymore, right? And that's what it means. And so sometimes I think that we fail people, right, in businesses, that we go, oh, you're a great salesperson, or you're a great techie. We're going to go ahead and have you lead a group of people in that field, but you don't give them leadership training or management training, for that matter. And I think that sets people up for failure. How do you do with that at your business? Like, how do you pick the next leaders and actually help them become successful and not wait till they fail?
Yeah, there's a principle that we talk about a lot, and it's called hire for character, train for skill. And we talked a bit about character even in this conversation. And you've got to know what you're looking for. Do you have someone who exhibits the character traits, and we could even expand it into more detailed attributes that you need for this role? So if you have a salesperson, you have to sit down, you have to think about it. There's a conscious exercise that has to happen when you hire every role. I'm doing this at my company right now as we're expanding the company. And it's not just, oh, we're going to hire a salesperson, contact the recruiting team and HR, go hire a salesperson. You have to sit down and say, what are the things we care about? Do they need to exhibit drive? Do they need to exhibit integrity? Do they need to exhibit humility, right? Is there resilience? So if I'm looking at my sales team, they have to be driven. They have to work hard. I need them to constantly be pushing. They have to exhibit resilience, because they're going to get told no a lot, but are they going to wake up the next morning and actually show up and keep at it? Are they going to be adaptable? And do they have adaptability to think about, is this working? Do they have humility to say, maybe what's happening right now isn't working for me, so I have to change, and I accept that. Those are some core characteristics that are going to tell me that this person can be successful in this role if they exhibit these core traits. And so going through that exercise is really important as you build your team. It doesn't take long. You don't have to create a dissertation on leadership and what you're looking for, but you can sit down and say, okay, I'm building an organization. Let me throw 8 things on the wall that I care about. and then they become my values. They become these core guiding principles. I want people to ascribe somewhat to this. And if you don't like them over time, change them. But we always get nervous in these exercises, and we're like, well, it's got to be perfect and set the conditions for the next 20 years. GE has been around for 100 years. They change all the time, in terms of these things. You can too, especially when you're starting out, right? If you don't like it, change it in a couple of months, but start somewhere, create that list. And then when you create your hiring plan and you look at the different roles, figure out which of those you care about. If the person you're hiring behaviorally exhibits these things and they have some skills, right? Because let's not, we can't be totally blind to that. You do have to have some skill in some stuff.
Right.
You can't be like, oh, I'm gonna, I need to hire a software engineer, but I like this person over here. I'll use myself, who was a journalism major, and I've never coded anything. Or if I don't know how to code, I don't know how to code. That's it. Sorry. But you also have to understand those baseline non-negotiables from a skill standpoint. But understand that there's a lot you can teach. There's a lot you can teach when you get into a role. Do you need them to be the best coder in the world? No. Can you teach them a lot about coding when you get there? Yes, if they exhibit these character traits that you need them to have in order for them to grow in that organization. I worked in an organization where they hired, before I got there, they needed a sales team, and they hired guys who were realtors. They actually did pretty well. And they had never sold packaged goods, before, but they knew how to wake up every day. They knew how to develop a client list. They knew how to hustle. They knew how to grind it out. They knew how to present the product, and they did a pretty good job at
it. That's another question too. And you just kind of put this in my head is, there's just two schools of thoughts, I think. One is that as a leader, you can lead any organization without having an understanding of, when I say understanding, like a basic understanding, like for me to go to, I don't know, say to your organization, you put me in as a manager. If I've managed someplace else, I should be able to do well there without even understanding necessarily the nuances of the organization. Do you believe that's true, or do you think that you have to have a working knowledge of the product? Let's say like plastics, for instance. Could you be, and the reason why I picked that because it's a GE and I think of the plastic plant. Could you run HR or people, as it's called now, for GE Plastics?
Well, the short answer is yeah, obviously. So if the head of GE is there listening, yeah, let's do it. But no, I think I always default to, I'm a Green Beret, right? So I always default to like, yeah, give me the challenge, I'll figure it out. It doesn't matter if I've never done it. I'll do the research, I'll find the experts, we'll make it happen. It really depends. It depends on the organization. So the military has the rank of general. The Army has the rank of general, and the Navy has the rank of admiral. It's the same thing, but what are they? By definition, they're generalists, meaning that they came up through a certain branch, but now they've reached a certain level where the military says you can generally lead and build an organization in something that you might not know a tremendous amount about, but your ability, when we combine that with a whole bank of technical experts under you, is going to drive this organization forward. So we talked about team ability. If you have a strong team, and a leader's job when they often come into these organizations, complex, matrix organizations like GE or, big places, you're not going to go into that organization, even as the CEO, knowing everything about it. You're just not. Like, you're not going to be an expert in building refrigerators and aircraft engines and, AC units. Like, it's just not possible. Right. But do you know the questions to ask? Do you know what you need to look for in your technical experts? And you may have these division heads, right? In my company now, we have department heads we have a finance and accounting department. Well, these guys are career CPAs. I'm not a CPA. I got my MBA in finance, but that's because I couldn't get jobs because I didn't know what a balance sheet was when I was getting out of the Army. So, but it doesn't mean I'm a CPA. And I'm not a CFO, but I know the questions that we need to ask generally about that stuff. And I rely on them to give me that information. Say we have an engineering department, we have a software engineering department, we have an AV department, and there's these technical functional heads who are experts in there. So you can lead across those, because you're looking for the vision as the senior leader in the organization. You're looking for, where are we going and what are the component pieces that I need to put into this organization to drive it to that next level, and the direction and the end state that I want to get it there. And your job is resource management.
Mm.
My job isn't to come into the accounting department and tell the accounting department how to create the proper GL for the clients, right? And the chart of accounts that should be used. But my job is to say, here's the vision. What are the resources that you need to get there? What are your human capital requirements? What are your financial capital requirements? What are your technology and your process requirements that are needed for you to get there? And what challenges do you face? How can I help you by bringing resources to bear that get you to where I need you to be? That's a lot different than me sitting down and saying, talk to me about how you create a balance sheet. Do I need it to be done well for client satisfaction? Absolutely. And am I going to ask hard questions when I get feedback that's not positive? I absolutely am. But it's not my job to be that expert. It's my job to bring the resources and empower them to be the expert.
When you talk about leadership and leadership failures in teams, and again, my only experience has been, the Navy stuff. So I'm going to talk a little bit about on the Navy side. I think you can pick up on it. Is that when you look at the Navy did a study, and they again look at the Navy SEALs, and they were looking at during BUDS. They have these things called boat crews. If everybody's ever seen, you can watch the documentary on it. And they have these guys that run boats into the water, and they have an officer associated with each team. And when they see a team that's doing really, really well, they will then pluck that officer out of that team and put it into and switch and take the team that's doing poorly, and put him down there and take the other officer and put them with the team that's performing well. And they have seen a remarkable change in positions. Now, that last place team doesn't always move all the way up to first place again, but they definitely move up the pecking order or two in the middle of the pack, maybe. And so that kind of shows that leadership is critical in stressful situations. I think. Is that about correct? What your experience has been?
Well, people are the most important thing in any organization. I mean, it's the tone is set by the leader. I mean, if it's not, then you got to look at what is setting the tone in the organization. I mean, there are well-oiled teams, even in Navy SEALs and Special Forces, that operate really well in the absence of a strong leader. But again, that leader's job is to inspire others to be the best versions of themselves. And it's that leader's job to bring them the resources that they need to be as effective as possible. And if you don't have somebody who's able to sit at the table and articulate that and do that, whether it's in the military or in any environment, in the corporate world, your team is going to suffer, because it still comes down to roles and responsibilities. The most common cause of workplace tension actually comes down to a misinterpretation of roles and responsibilities, and people coming to work with a perception that they're responsible for something other than what their boss or their company actually says they're responsible for, or what other people in their company believe that they're responsible for. And so that creates this tension in the organization. Clearly articulating and defining roles and responsibilities and holding people accountable to that is what helps to build sustainable organizations. Because if I'm the leader, then I know exactly when I'm sitting at the table, what I'm supposed to be doing. If I'm a weak leader, my team is going to suffer if my job is to bring them these resources that I talked about and advocate to executive staff, advocate for budget, advocate for additional headcount. If I can't do those things because I either don't understand the problem, I'm not educated enough in this domain to be able to speak intelligently, I lack the respect of my peers, my boss, the people below me, then the whole team is going to suffer. And that's where things will start to break down. So when you start to switch people like that, like they do in these selection courses, that's what they're trying to understand. They're trying to see who is the driver in this group of the culture. And when you swap people like that, you can quickly identify it.
That's pretty interesting, and I think it's really telling to see, how team dynamics are very interesting, and I've seen in baseball and football, you've seen that you change one leader out, and the team completely turns around. Hey, let's talk about your podcast really quick. We're coming here to the end of this one, and I want people to be able to find you. Now, first of all, congratulations on 1 year.
Thanks.
That's a great milestone right there. And I do follow you and I listen to your podcast. You have some great guests on there. What's your podcast about, and how can people find you?
Yeah, absolutely. So the podcast is called the Jedburgh Podcast. It's founded in the lineage of the Special Forces teams of the past. And Germany, in World War II, had occupied France, and the Allies identified that the only way to win the war was to invade France, and the only way was through Normandy. But the Germans were well entrenched there, and no operation had an ability to succeed. And so the Allies came up with Operation Jedburgh. They recruited people from the U.S., the British, and the French militaries all across the military. They made 3-man teams. They took them to Jedburgh, Scotland, and they trained them to jump into behind enemy lines on the beaches in Normandy, starting the night before D-Day. And 3-man teams linked up with occupied France with French resistance. They trained them, they equipped them, and they conducted sabotage and subversion operations against the Germans, effectively winning the war. So they were what I call transformative leaders. They were visionaries. They were drivers of change, and they were dedicated to winning no matter the challenge. And our podcast is about today's modern day Jedburghs. And so we talk to founders, CEOs, professional athletes, Olympic athletes, social activists, journalists, authors, those who are driving change throughout society, throughout business, throughout athletics, and who are dedicated to advancing their cause and advancing winning, regardless of what they face. And we've had some really impactful conversations. I couldn't be more honored to have made it a year. And we have 50 episodes down, and we release every Thursday. We're on all podcast platforms. Wherever you get your podcasts, you'll most likely find us. And we're on Instagram, Twitter, all social media at Jedburgh Podcast.
Absolutely. And it's a great podcast to follow, and I recommend it as well. Hey, Fran, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.
Awesome. Hey, everybody, thank you for your time today as well. As always, it's always a pleasure. And, leadership is a very special job, if you will. And I know it's not a job description, but it definitely is something that as you move up the ranks, and also when you're in the locker room, you can always just be a leader, lead yourself and lead a team. Until next week, thank you so much for being with us. Stay safe and stay hydrated.